I never thought the Lord would allow me to see with my own eyes what thousands only imagine in rumors or speculation, but that early morning, while I was praying and fasting, seeking answers for my ministry, I was raptured in spirit to a place that was not of this world. The clock read 3:33, and an invisible force pulled me from my room. I found myself in a dark hallway whose walls sweated liquid fire. The air was thick, burning, filled with screams that resembled nothing human. I understood immediately, I was in hell, and there I was going to witness something that would mark my soul forever. The first thing I heard was music, but not a heavenly melody, rather distorted chords that seemed to slither like snakes through the flames. They were familiar songs, melodies that on earth had filled stadiums and conquered generations. I felt a chill because I recognized the notes. They were Beatles songs, but sung with demonic, twisted, mocking voices. The demons beat drums made of skulls, played guitars with strings of fire, and every note was a lament turned into mockery. The angel who accompanied me said, "Look closely, for what you will see is the fruit of idolatry." The world hailed them as gods, but here is revealed the truth of their eternity. I advanced trembling until I reached an enormous hall shaped like an inverted theater. In the center, on a blazing stage, were they, the Beatles, each in a cage made of incandescent iron. Their bodies were deformed by the fire, but their faces were still distinguishable. John Lennon screamed in despair, his hands trembled as if he still wanted to hold a guitar. Paul McCartney wept blood, George Harrison groaned in chains, and Ringo Starr was whipped by demons who mimicked drum beats with fiery whips. The most terrifying thing was when Satan himself appeared. His gigantic figure loomed over the stage like a conductor of torment. In a mocking voice, he said, "Remember when you declared yourselves more famous than Jesus? Do you remember when the world called them immortal, geniuses, idols? Here is their eternity." Fame turned into condemnation, talent transformed into mockery, and with each word, the bell writhed more fiercely, as if the memory of their own words were knives piercing their souls. I saw Satan pull out a mirror of fire. Projected on it were scenes of crowds singing their songs, young people weeping with emotion, parents celebrating their music as if they were prophets of a new age. But then those images transformed into chains that fell upon their bodies. Every clap, every shout, every record sold was another brick in the prison that now holds them captive. Satan screamed as the demons repeated lines from their lyrics in a mocking tone, transforming the music that once enchanted the world into spiritual whips. The angel explained to me, hell doesn't just punish what they did, but what they represented. Their music became a religion for millions, their fame eclipsed the truth of Christ, their statements were seeds of blasphemy that grew in entire generations, and now they pay not only for their actions, but for the altars that millions erected in their name. I saw thousands of souls in the stands, dressed in Beatles t-shirts and memorabilia, shouting as if at a concert, but their voices were wails. They were those who in life had been more attentive to the music than to the word, and now they were condemned to accompany their idols to the same fate. The spectacle was macabre. Demons disguised as fans waved burning banners, chanted songs in blasphemous tones, and each chorus was another nail in the Beatles' cages. Satan smiled contentedly, holding up a blood-stained contract. They didn't sign with ink, but with their pride, with their rebellion, with every word against the heaven. This was the price, and now I'm collecting my share. John Lennon shouted, "One more chance." But his voice was lost in echoes of mockery. He replied, "Your chance was in life, and you chose fame over the cross." I felt my bones break with terror and compassion at the same time. Human glory had become eternal shame. I watched as the Beatles were forced to sing their songs, but their voices transformed into screams of pain. Every note was a fire that burned their throats. It was the perfect investment. What they used to gain fame on earth was now their torment in eternity. As the Beatles' screams echoed in that infernal theater, the demons began to orchestrate a macabre spectacle. It was like a concert, but there were no joyful fans or colorful lights, only shadows, fire, and chains. I saw thousands of souls clapping, not with joy, but with bloodied hands that shattered upon impact. Each clap was a lament, each chorus a curse. The demons, disguised as musicians, played distorted versions of their songs, and each lyric became a dagger piercing the souls of those who had written them. John Lennon was forced to sing words he had once used to defy the sacred, each phrase mocking Christ transformed into fire that erupted from his mouth, consuming him from within. I saw him scream, trying to stop, but the chains forced him to continue. Satan looked at him with contempt and said, "Your words became eternal, not because of the music, but because they sealed your doom. You said you were more famous than Jesus, now you are famous here as a trophy of my eternal mockery." Paul McCartney wept blood as demons whipped him, repeating his own melodies, those that exalted the flesh and the pleasures of the world. Each chord became snakes that coiled around his neck. The angel explained to me, every song that led millions astray from the truth is now their condemnation. It's not about the notes, but the spirit behind them. The enemy took music as an altar, and they were priests of a misguided worship. George Harrison, who had dabbled in Eastern philosophies and spiritualities foreign to the gospel, was surrounded by demons dressed as false gurus. They forced him to repeat mantras that burned like coals on his tongue. Each time he tried to summon an inner light, the shadows enveloped him more, like snakes of smoke. Satan mocked, saying, "You sought peace in other ways? Here is your eternity of silence and confusion. You rejected the only path, and now you are lost forever." Ringo Starr was lashed with whips that mimicked drum rhythms. Demons kept time, striking his body as if it were the instrument of a hellish symphony. Each blow raised sparks of fire that rained down on the doomed crowd. Wails mingled with screams of songs that had once been anthems of youth, and all hell seemed to dance not with joy, but with a soul-rending sarcasm. The most terrifying thing was seeing the multitudes of souls who had followed the Beatles in life. They were condemned to eternally repeat the choruses of their songs, but their voices were shrieks. They sang while they wept, chanted while they burned, and each word transformed into chains upon their own bodies. I saw young and old, men and women, all trapped in an eternal concert that never ended. Hell had turned earthly worship into a cruel parody, a cult of pain that never ceased. Satan raised his voice like a master of ceremonies and shouted, "This is the fate of those who seek fame above truth. This is the price of every blasphemy, of every mockery of the eternal." And then he produced a dark book inscribed with phrases the Beatles had spoken in life. Each phrase was read aloud and transformed into a fiery whip that lashed them. They said that music would save the world. "Here is your salvation," he screamed as the flames intensified. The angel with me wept and said, "The world idolized them, but forgot that only one deserves glory." Now hell uses their fame as a mockery to show that no man can take the place of Christ. Every fallen idol becomes a trophy of the enemy, and every follower of those who worshipped him in life share his fate. My knees trembled, and I understood with a pang that millions had sung those songs without knowing they were feeding dark altars. The flames rose and fell to the rhythm of distorted melodies. It was as if hell had created an eternal concert to display its victory over idolatry. And in the midst of that spectacle, I saw Satan pointing toward the earth, saying, "Even today they continued to sing his songs. As long as his music lives on, I will continue to claim souls." And a mocking roar filled the entire abyss. As I watched that infernal concert, the angel drew my gaze to the highest stands. There were not only the Beatles and their followers, but entire multitudes of souls who in life had given their hearts to music more than to truth. I saw entire generations marked by the songs of the Beatles, young people from the 60s who had screamed for them in stadiums, parents who had passed on that idolatry to their children, and even grandchildren who continued to defend their legacy as if it were a religion. They were all there, trapped in the same condemnation, as if the echo of their music had dragged entire families toward the abyss. The angel explained to me in a grave voice, "The enemy doesn't use music merely as entertainment, he uses it as doctrine. What began as melody became philosophy, and what seemed like art became an altar. Every lyric repeated without discernment was engraved on millions of hearts as if it were truth, and those seeds grew to produce idolatry, rebellion, and blasphemy against God." My eyes filled with tears because I understood that it wasn't just the Beatles who were suffering, but all those who had built invisible altars around them. I saw how Satan unfurled a great burning scroll that stretched like a curtain over the abyss. It projected scenes of the earth, massive concerts, thousands of young people raising lighters, weeping, singing every word as if it were a creed. I saw interviews where they proclaimed phrases of freedom that actually concealed spiritual chains. "We did more for the youth than any preacher," some said, and those words were like spears piercing the heavens. Hell celebrated because it had managed to supplant sermons with songs, temples with stadiums, Bibles with records. The angel showed me how the lyrics became spirits. Words about rebellion were demons that incited children to disobey their parents. Words about pleasure were chains of lust that trapped entire generations. Words about pride transformed into false grounds that led thousands to live believing they didn't need God, and all that, disguised as music, was received with smiles and applause. The enemy was cunning. He didn't need satanic temples to deceive, he only needed catchy melodies. The most terrifying thing was seeing how that influence remained active even after the members' deaths. Younger people of this generation are entering the same abyss simply because they chose to embrace the nostalgia of that music. Satan roared mockingly, "They live on in every playlist, every documentary, every film, and as long as their songs are played, I will continue to harvest souls." And with each word, more chains fell upon the doomed multitude. I saw John Lennon being forced to watch, over and over, the moment he declared that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus. That phrase echoed endlessly, and each repetition was a fiery lash across his back. Paul Carney saw crowds singing his lyrics while demons screamed at him, "Look what you inspired, look what you spread." George Harrison was tormented by figures mimicking false gurus, telling him, "Your search for peace without Christ opened doors to millions of deceived people," and Ringo Starr was ridiculed by demons mimicking his drumming, mocking every beat he'd ever made, to thrill crowds. The most painful thing was seeing thousands of young souls who had never met the Beatles in person, but who had idolized them as if they were eternal. They screamed with chains in their throats, forced to repeat lyrics they never fully understood, but had accepted as part of their identity. It was cultural slavery disguised as freedom. The angel told me, "That's what happens when man places other men on the throne that belongs only to Christ." Idolatry doesn't always take the form of a statue. Sometimes it takes the form of a song, a poster, a souvenir. Then I saw an even more macabre spectacle. Satan ordered the demons to recreate iconic moments of the band. I saw them reenact the famous rooftop concert, but this time there was no joy. Only chains and fire. I saw them imitate album covers, but the faces were distorted and burned like flaming masks. Each scene was a reminder that what was exalted on earth was now ridiculed in hell. The enemy not only punished them, but used them as trophies to demonstrate that no one who defies heaven goes unanswered. The angel touched my shoulder and said with tears in his eyes, "You see, just as on earth they filled stadiums, now they fill prisons. Just as they were acclaimed as gods, now they are exposed as slaves, and the multitudes who followed them share their fate." This is what happens when talent is confused with divinity, fame with salvation. The enemy does not spare his own servants. He exalts them only to destroy them. Suddenly, in the midst of that infernal concert that seemed to have no end, a radiance pierced the darkness. It was not a reflection of fire nor a demonic spark. It was a pure white light, impossible to imitate. Satan stopped dead in his tracks, and the demons retreated like wounded animals, in fear of that clarity. The distorted music ceased, and the only sounds were the roar of the flames and the cries of the trapped multitudes. The voice of heaven then resounded like a soft but powerful thunderclap. "They chose his glory before mine. They sought to be called gods when there is only one true God, and this is the consequence of their idolatry. But you who have seen, warn the generations that are still alive, because not everyone has to end up here." The angel held me tight because my body trembled under the weight of those words. I saw the light projected onto the cages of fire where the Beatles were. For an instant, their faces, deformed by torment, regained human features. John Lennon wept with a cry that shook the entire abyss. "Jesus, forgive us." Paul McCartney tried to cover his face, George Harrison fell to his knees and Ringo Starr whimpered like a frightened child, but the voice from heaven answered solemnly, "The opportunity was on earth. Here there is no mercy, only justice." Satan, enraged, raised his claws to the light and shouted mockingly, "They still talk about them on earth, they still sing their songs, they still worship them as idols. As long as the memory of their fame exists, I will continue claiming souls in their name." And with that declaration, he conjured up images of the present day, young people with headphones, parents watching documentaries, crowds celebrating anniversaries of their albums. Each image fell like chains upon new souls that were dragged toward the abyss. The angel whispered to me, "The enemy uses nostalgia as bait. Many believe they are honoring the music, but in reality, they are perpetuating idolatry. Hell feeds on memory without discernment, on the exaltation of man above God." My heart burned with pain because I understood that this war hadn't ended in the 1960s, but continued to this day. Then I saw how the light of heaven transformed into a sword. A powerful voice declared, "I share my glory with no one. I will raise up generations who worship in spirit and in truth, not in songs that lead to perdition. My voice will resound above all earthly fame." And that sword of light struck the infernal stage, cleaving it in two. The demons screamed in fury, and Satan retreated. Although he was not destroyed, his face showed rage and, at the same time, powerlessness, for he knew he could not extinguish the light of heaven. The condemned multitude raised their hands, pleading for a second chance, but the door was closed. The angel explained to me, "The Lord shows this vision not to condemn the living, but to warn. Many who follow these steps today can still choose life. You must speak boldly, because every testimony shared is a weapon against lies." In the midst of that tension, Satan roared again, "You can preach, you can shout, but as long as there are men who prefer fame to the cross, I will continue to reap. As long as the world continues to call idols legends, I will continue to crown them in my kingdom of chains." His laughter once again filled the abyss, although it was clear that the light had weakened him. The angel lifted me from the ground and said, "You have seen the price of blasphemy and idolatry. Now go back and speak. Let no one think that eternal fame on earth is a guarantee of salvation, for every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, even those who weep here forever." My spirit trembled as I understood that earthly fame had not protected the Beatles, but had sealed their doom, and the echo of their songs, which still lives on earth, continues to be used by the enemy as an invisible snare to ensnare entire generations. The Lord commanded me to warn them, "Do not repeat their phrases as if they were wisdom, do not raise altars to their name, do not put your hope in fallen idols, seek my glory, for only in me is there eternal life." The radiance of heaven faded little by little, leaving an indelible mark on that abyss, but hell roared again with force. The demons, though frightened by the light, redoubled their mocking spectacle. It was as if they wanted to demonstrate that even in the midst of partial defeat they would continue claiming souls. Then a group of demons took to the stage grotesquely disguised as teenage fans from the 60s, waving burning banners with blasphemous phrases. They shouted the names of the Beatles in distorted voices as if they were chants of inverted worship. I saw Satan, with a wicked grin, raise that fiery mirror again. On it were projected scenes not only from the past, but from the present: concerts, tributes, films, documentaries, merchandise, even children of today dancing innocently, to the rhythm of those songs. Each image was another nail in the chains that held the infernal stage. The angel whispered to me with pain, "The enemy is an expert at recycling the old to ensnare the new. What began as the idolatry of a generation perpetuates itself as culture, and what seems innocent is actually the seed of slavery." Suddenly, I saw thousands of young souls being dragged into the abyss by currents of sound. They were musical notes transformed into rivers of fire that fell from the earth to hell. Each chord was like a hook that pierced their hearts and dragged them in without resistance. I saw teenagers with headphones still on, crossing the gates of the abyss without realizing what awaited them, and each step was celebrated by demons who shouted, "Another one for the eternal concert." The angel showed me how the lyrics, repeated for decades, had formed invisible doctrines: free love, rebellion against all authority, pleasure without limits. All those seemingly harmless phrases were spirits multiplying across generations. The enemy had managed to disguise rebellion as freedom and idolatry as culture, and millions had fallen into that trap without realizing they were opening spiritual doors to their own damnation. Then, a chilling detail appeared before my eyes. Satan brought out a music stand of fire and placed burning scores upon it. Each musical note written on them was not ink, but blood. The angel explained to me, every clap, every tear, every life given over to idolatry was an offering collected by hell. The blood of entire generations was inscribed on those scores like invisible contracts signed with emotion instead of discernment. He raised those scores and shouted, "As long as their songs keep playing, I will keep claiming souls. I don't need them to believe in me. It's enough that they believe in themselves. I don't need temples. It's enough that they raise altars of nostalgia in their hearts. They surrender themselves, and I simply collect what belongs to me." And as he said those words, the flames rose even higher, illuminating the distorted faces of the Beatles, forced to sing with voices of pain, while their doomed followers repeated each chorus through tears. I saw John Lennon trying to cover his ears, but the demons forced them open so he couldn't stop hearing his own blasphemy turned into torment. I saw Paul McCartney chained to a burning iron piano, his fingers scorching as he played chords that were whips against his own body. George Harrison was surrounded by demons in fake robes, repeating mantras that suffocated him, and Ringo Starr was forced to keep the beat with chains that pounded on his back like drums. The angel, with tears in his eyes, told me, "They are an example of how the glory of man becomes eternal mockery, but the message isn't just about them, but to warn those who are still alive. Idolatry never ends well, whether with music, fame, or riches. Everything that steals the glory that belongs to God ends here in eternal chains." I looked up and saw heaven open for a moment. A soft but firm voice said, "Tell them not to seek refuge in songs, but in my word. Tell them not to worship men, but the beloved Son. Tell them there is still time to repent, because I do not want anyone to perish, but that all should come to repentance." That voice was like balm in the midst of horror, and I understood that even though hell mocked, heaven still offered salvation to those who still had life. The vision became unbearable because I realized I was seeing not only the punishment of some famous men, but the reflection of the fate of millions who continue to trust in idols. The angel squeezed my arm and said, "What you have seen you must tell without fear, even if they mock you, even if they say you exaggerate. Because the enemy feeds on silence, but weakens when the truth is proclaimed." The silence was broken by a terrifying roar. Satan, furious at the eruption of the celestial light, began to pace the scene like a caged beast. His eyes burned like glowing coals and his voice resonated with echoes that pierced the bowels of the abyss. "Let the whole world knows that human glory belongs to me. I gave them fame, I gave them multitudes, I gave them applause, and they gave me their souls. No idol escapes my grasp, and even those who still sing their songs today, though ignoring my name, are already marked by my seal." His words made the cages of fire tremble where the Beatles were chained. I saw Lennon writhing, McCartney pounding on the bars in despair, Harrison screaming in a deep lament, and Ringo shrinking like a child. The stage transformed into a cruel parody of a concert. Every lament was amplified as if by invisible microphones. Every clang of a chain was percussion, every scream was melody. All of hell sang. But not songs of hope, but of eternal condemnation. The angel accompanying me explained in a firm voice, "The enemy turns the gifts God gives into weapons of destruction. Music that could have been used for the glory of the Creator, here it becomes an instrument of torment. Hell is the inversion of the sacred. What was a gift becomes punishment, what was talent becomes a chain." I felt a chill as I understood that beauty without God becomes a curse and that art given over to pride becomes an altar to the gods. Suddenly, Satan conjured a gigantic screen of fire in the air where he projected headlines, magazine covers, interviews, and documentaries. Every word of exaltation toward the beautiful transformed into spears that pierced the condemned multitudes. Legends, rock kings, the immortals of music, repeated human voices in those images. and every declaration was a contract that sealed chains in the spiritual world. As long as men call them gods, they will remain mine, the adversary roared with satisfaction. The angel, with tears in his eyes, told me, the world believes that words are harmless, but they don't know that every declaration raises altars. When they exalt man more than God, they are unwittingly signing a pact. Idolatry disguises itself as culture, but before heaven, it is still sin. That phrase pierced my heart, because I understood that even phrases of innocent admiration can open the gates of hell when they displace divine glory. I then saw how the scene shifted to earth: young people in bars, families at gatherings, tribute concerts in modern stadiums, all singing with euphoria. What for them was mere entertainment, in the spiritual world, they were invisible chains descending from their throats into the abyss. Each chorus fueled the flames, each ovation strengthened the Beatles' burning cages. Satan smiled and shouted, "They continue to worship, it doesn't matter that they don't name me, as long as they exalt their idols, my kingdom grows." The infernal spectacle intensified. Demons began distributing instruments made of fire among the crowds. Condemned, they were given guitars that turned into snakes, microphones that were nails, drums that were skulls. They were forced to play eternally, and every sound was pain. All of hell had been transformed into an eternal festival of blasphemy and torment. It was the demonic caricature of what was once called the greatest musical phenomenon of all time. The angel pointed at me urgently and said, "What you have seen is not only condemnation, it is a warning." Just as he boasts of his victory, so too does heaven want to awaken those who are still alive. The danger is not in the dead, but in the living who imitate them. Every generation that inherits their music without discernment also inherits the chains. Speak without fear, because many can still be freed and recognize in time the poison disguised as melody. The angel's words were like fire in my bones. I saw then that thousands of young people on earth were at a point of decision. Some listened to the songs and laughed, but others felt a deep emptiness, as if something in their spirit recognized that they were not just melodies. It was as if the Spirit of God were still touching their hearts, giving them the opportunity to choose between following cultural idolatry or breaking with it to seek eternal truth. Satan roared for the last time on that stage, raising his hands like the conductor of an orchestra of torment. This is the legacy of the Beatles. No matter how many decades have passed, their echo continues to enslave, and as long as their fame is remembered, I will continue to collect. Their laughter resonated like thunder that shook all of hell, and in that echo, I understood that what I had witnessed was a prophetic warning for this generation. The scene of hell began to change shape as if it were a living theater. The fire transformed into giant screens where multitudes of people appeared, not only from England or the 1960s, but from all subsequent generations. I saw teenagers from different eras, with headphones, with vinyl records, with cassettes, with headquarters, and then with smartphones. They all moved their heads to the rhythm of the same songs, repeating lyrics that seemed harmless, but which in the spiritual world transformed into decrees of idolatry. The angel told me, every time a generation revives what is not under the blood of Christ, it also revives the chains of the past. The enemy knows how to perpetuate his conquests through music and culture. The roar grew louder when Satan pointed to a crowd slowly descending into the abyss. They were young souls wearing t-shirts emblazoned with the faces of the Beatles. Some wept with emotion as if they were at a concert, but their tears were swallowed by the burning lava. Others fanatically chanted phrases as if they were prayers, and Satan roared, "They are mine," because they confused art with worship, talent with divinity. You don't need to worship me to belong to me. It is enough that you worship someone else instead of the Creator. I shuddered upon hearing this revelation because I understood that hell seeks not only visible satanic rituals, but subtle substitutions. The human heart was created to worship, and if it does not worship the true God, it inevitably ends up raising an altar to any figure, any idol, even if it is disguised as popular culture. At that moment, the Spirit reminded me of the words of Exodus, "You shall have no other gods before me," and I understood that this warning is not only for ancient idolatrous peoples, but for every generation that raises up stars instead of looking to the cross. The vision grew darker. The beetles inside their cages began to sing again, but now they did so not with joy or strength, but like puppets manipulated by demons pulling their strings. Their songs were distorted into blasphemies. Lyrics that were once hymns of love and peace, now became mockery of heaven. All you need hell, the demons screamed in cruel parody, and each chorus was repeated by thousands of condemned souls who couldn't stop singing even if they wanted to. It was like an eternal spell. The angel took my arm and he showed another scene. On earth, innocent young people were learning to play guitar and repeating Beatles songs as an exercise, which for them was innocent fun. In the spiritual world, it became an echo that fueled ancient flames. Look, the angel said, hell doesn't just choose explicit pacts, it also takes advantage of ignorance. Those who don't discern repeat chains, and each generation that imitates inherits the spiritual burden of the previous one. I then saw thousands of musicians who had taken the Beatles as inspiration. Some achieved fame, others died young, many ended up in excess. The angel whispered to me, the enemy multiplies what contaminates. What began as seeds of rebellion became a forest of idolatry. It's not just for men, it's an entire system that used them as a gateway. And the saddest thing is that many within the church prefer to remain silent so as not to offend the culture, but their silence will also be judged. Satan, seeing my horror, approached mockingly, his shadow stretched for miles, and in a booming voice he said, "Preacher, you saw what they didn't. I made music my global altar. I did it with melodies that spoke of peace but sowed rebellion. I did it with smiling faces that hid invisible chains, and even today millions remember them not for their humanity, but as demigods. That is my victory, because as long as the world celebrates their names, souls will continue to fall here." The air filled with a thick smoke that resembled a corrupted incense burner. Demons dressed as fanatics waved banners bearing famous lyrics from the songs, but instead of joy, the smoke from those banners was poison. The souls who breathed it grew weaker and fell to their knees. The Beatles watched helplessly, knowing that their legacy was now the cause of damnation for millions. Lennon screamed through the flames, "We didn't want this, we didn't plan it this way," but Satan interrupted him with a sadistic laugh. "You didn't need to plan it, you just needed to live for yourself. I did the rest." My heart broke at the contrast. On Earth, the Beatles were remembered as geniuses, icons, inspiration. In hell, they were displayed as trophies of eternal defeat, as trophies of vanity. The angel told me in a grave voice, "Fame without Christ is not a blessing, it is a curse, because the glory of man never sustains him. On the contrary, it drags him faster into the abyss. This is the destiny of all who prefer to be remembered by multitudes rather than be known by the Creator." At that moment, I heard a command from heaven, "Speak what you see, even if no one wants to hear it. Speak, because many still have time to choose. If you remain silent, their blood will be upon you." And I knew I had to tell this story faithfully, even if they accuse me of exaggeration, even if they call me crazy, even if they close doors on me, because what came was entertainment. It was a direct warning from the Spirit to a generation that still repeats old songs without knowing that behind every note there are invisible chains. Satan's roar transformed into a macabre ovation. Thousands of demons chanted like a stadium crowd, but their voices were guttural, distorted like echoes of breaking bones. All of hell vibrated as if it were an endless concert, a festival of idolatry where the Beatles were fallen stars turned into eternal examples of perdition. I felt that my ears were going to burst, that my soul was breaking from enduring that infernal cacophony. The angel beside me covered me with